I remember the smell of that throne room more than anything else. It smelled like old stone, like something ancient and cold that had never once been questioned. The walls were black, polished so perfectly that you could see your own face in them. And I stood there, in the middle of it all, with 12 Nigma soldiers forming a circle around me, their scaled hands resting near their weapons, their golden eyes watching me the way a predator watches something it has already decided is not a threat. That was the mistake. Right there. That look. My name is Commander Yara Voss. I was 38 years old when I walked into the Nigma Imperial Palace on Nigma Prime. I had spent 6 years studying their language, their culture, their history. I knew how they thought. I knew how they saw the galaxy, as a ladder, with themselves at the top and everyone else arranged below them in order of usefulness. Humans, to their eyes, were near the bottom. We were new. We were small. We were emotional. We had only recently reached the stars, and we had not yet shown the galaxy anything that demanded respect. That was also a mistake. Theirs, not ours. I had been sent as the third delegation. The first two had gone before me, carrying the same message, and neither had come back in a way that I want to describe in detail. What I will say is that when my shuttle docked at the Imperial Palace, I already knew what I was walking into. I knew the Emperor would not listen. I knew the war priest sitting beside his throne would laugh. I knew every single person in that room believed I was there to beg. I was not there to beg. I had one job. Say the words, say them clearly. Make sure, beyond any possible doubt, that the Nigma Empire understood exactly what they were choosing when they chose to ignore us. History had to record that humanity gave them every chance, that we stood in their palace, in their city, on their world, and we told them the truth to their faces. The Emperor was enormous, even for a Nigma. He sat on a throne built from the bones of 17 alien species his empire had already conquered. I had read about it in their own historical texts, and they were proud of it. He looked at me the way you might look at a small insect that had crawled across your dinner table. I spoke first. I told him that humanity had been watching what the Nigma Empire was doing to our frontier colonies. I told him that 3 settlements had been destroyed, that thousands of people were gone, that families had been ended without warning or reason. I told him that we had tried twice before to resolve this through conversation, and that we were willing to try once more, but that this was the last time. I told him, as clearly as I could, in his own language, that if the Empire continued, humanity would respond, and that the response would be total. He smiled. A Nigma smile is mostly teeth. One of the war priests leaned forward and said something that translated roughly as, "The tiny ones have come to growl." The room found this very entertaining. I stood still and waited for the laughter to finish. Then I said the words I had been sent to say. "You do not understand what you are choosing to disturb. We have survived things that should have ended us. We have faced our own extinction more than once, and we are still here. We have had centuries of learning how to hurt each other in ways that nothing in this galaxy has ever imagined. We are not a civilization that stops. We do not know how to stop. If you do this, you will not get a border conflict. You will not get a skirmish. You will get everything we have, without limit, without pause, until there is nothing left to argue about." The Emperor raised one scaled finger and had me escorted out. 2 days later, when I boarded my shuttle to leave, I found what was waiting for me in the cargo bay. I will not describe it. I will only say that the Nigma Empire had sent me a message in return, and the message was clear. They were not afraid. They thought they had seen everything the galaxy had to offer. They had faced 100 species and crushed them all. What could one new, small, emotional civilization possibly do? I sealed the cargo bay. I sat in the pilot's seat. I set the course for Earth. And I cried for about 4 minutes, because that is what I do when I am very, very angry, and I need to get it out of my system before I have to be useful again. Then I wiped my face and opened a channel to the High Council, and told them to make the call. Earth's High Council had not voted for total war authorization in 300 years. There are people who did not think such a thing was still possible, that humanity had moved past it, that we had grown too comfortable, too careful, too used to peace to remember what we were capable of choosing. Those people did not understand that peace is a choice, and choices can be unmade. The vote was unanimous. I have never heard of a unanimous vote on anything in human history. That tells you something about the mood. What happened next is not what the Nigma Empire expected, because they were operating on a very simple model of how civilizations work. In their experience, when a smaller civilization went to war with a larger one, the smaller civilization mobilized what it had, fought with what it had, and eventually collapsed under the weight of what it did not have. It was a numbers game. The Nigma had more ships, more soldiers, more territory, more centuries of practice. What they did not account for was a civilization that had spent decades quietly building things it never intended to show anyone unless it had no other choice. Humanity had been in the galaxy long enough to understand one simple truth. The galaxy is not safe. There were things out there that could end us. We had seen them. We had studied them. We had looked at the stars and understood, in a way that perhaps no other species had ever fully felt in their bones, that survival was not guaranteed. It was earned. Every single day, it had to be earned. So we had built. Quietly, carefully, in the dark places between the stars, we had built. Ships that existed in no registry, weapons that had never been tested in front of an audience, strategies that had been sitting in sealed files for 20 years, waiting for a moment that everyone hoped would never come. That moment came. The fleet that launched from the far side of Jupiter was not the fleet anyone in the galaxy knew humanity had. It was not even the fleet we had shown during routine patrols, or the diplomatic escorts we sent to galactic summits. The ships that moved toward Nigma space were something else entirely. Dark, fast, and very, very quiet, until they were not. I was embedded with a frontline strike unit. Not because I had to be, because I had stood in that throne room and made a promise, and I was not the kind of person who sent other people to keep promises she had made herself. What I remember most about those early days is how human everyone was. That might sound like an obvious thing to say, but I mean it in a specific way. The soldiers around me were funny. They argued about food. They played old songs on small speakers while they cleaned their equipment. They called their families when the signal allowed it. They were completely, absolutely, unmistakably ordinary people. And then the ramp dropped and they were something else. I do not fully understand it, even now. It is something that observers from other species have tried to describe and have never quite captured correctly. There is a thing that happens to humans when the moment arrives, when there is no more waiting and no more choosing, when the only direction available is forward. Something shifts. The ordinary people who had been arguing about food 10 minutes earlier became something focused and precise and absolutely committed to the task in front of them. The first real engagement went 11 minutes. The Nigma force that met us had been told to expect a patrol response, something small and easy to push back. When the battle report reached the Imperial Palace, the Emperor's generals apparently refused to believe it. They sent scouts. The scouts confirmed the report. The generals sat in silence for a while. That silence was not something humanity planned. It was a gift from the Nigma's own certainty. They had been so sure of what we were that they had built no plans for what we turned out to be. We moved quickly. Not carelessly. Humans do not move carelessly when lives are involved, but with a speed that surprised even some of our own commanders. The Nigma had built their empire on the assumption that any enemy would fight the way they fought. Head-on, loudly, in straight lines. We did not fight that way. We cut supply routes. We isolated stations. We showed up where we were least expected, and then held position until the mathematics made the outcome obvious. The siege of Karath Station is the one I remember most clearly. It was considered impregnable. It supplied 1/3 of the Nigma's forward operation capability. We did not assault it directly. We simply surrounded it, cut every route in and out, and waited. The garrison inside had enough food and water for 11 days. On the 9th day, the commander of the station opened communications and asked about the terms of surrender. I was the one who took that call. The commander's voice was steady, but there was something in it. Not fear, exactly. It was closer to confusion. He had been told, his entire life, that his empire was a thing that did not surrender. He was having a very hard time processing what was happening. I kept my voice calm. I gave him the terms. I told him that his people would not be harmed, that they would be treated according to every standard we applied to our own, and that this would be over when he opened the station's exterior doors. He was quiet for a moment. Then he asked why we had not simply destroyed the station. I told him we did not do things that were not necessary. Another silence. Then the doors opened. The war lasted 14 months. There were days that were very long and very hard, and I would not be honest if I said humanity came through it without cost. We lost people. Good people who had argued about food and played old songs and called their families when the signal allowed. That weight does not go away, and I do not think it should. The empire, which had existed for 400 years and swallowed 32 civilizations, began to collapse from the inside. Not only because of military pressure, though that was significant, but because the Nigma people had been promised something that was never delivered. They had been told humanity would fold quickly, that the conflict would be over before the end of the season. When the reports coming back were nothing like what they had been promised, trust inside the empire began to crack. Trust is a fragile thing, even in empires built on absolute authority. The emperor tried to negotiate. He offered to return the colonies. He offered resources, technology, anything. Earth's council gave the same reply each time. 2 words: unconditional surrender. When we arrived at Nigma Prime, the final fleet in position above their homeworld, I expected a long siege. I expected the war priests to make speeches about dying with honor. What I did not expect was what actually happened. We did not open fire. We held position and broadcast a single signal, in the Nigma language, on every frequency at once. Open your gates. This ends today. It was the civilian population that opened them, not the military, not the Emperor's Guard. Ordinary Nigma people, in the streets around the palace, who had spent 14 months being told that victory was coming, and had finally, completely stopped believing it. The Emperor was taken into custody by his own Senate before we ever set foot on the surface. I walked back into that throne room, the same black walls, the same cold smell. The throne was empty. The war priests were gone. There was a young Nigma aide standing near the entrance, clipboard in hand, looking like someone who had drawn a very short straw when the jobs for the day were being assigned. I sat down in one of the chairs near the signing table. Not the Emperor's throne. That was not mine, and I had no interest in it. Just a chair, because my legs had been carrying me for 14 months, and they were tired. The aide looked at me for a moment, and then, quietly, in careful and formal Nigma, asked me a question. He asked how humanity had known we would win. I looked at him for a while before I answered. He was young. He had probably been in school when all of this started. None of this had been his choice. We did not know, I said. We just knew we would not stop. He wrote something down on his clipboard. I do not know what. The peace terms were not cruel. The empire was dissolved as a military organization. Its occupied territories were granted independence. Human observers were placed throughout the former imperial space for 50 years, not as rulers but as witnesses, to make sure the agreements held and that what had happened to those frontier colonies never happened again to anyone. The Nigma people were not punished. They were simply no longer permitted to make war. Some of them have done remarkable things since then. A Nigma agricultural program has helped 4 other species survive drought conditions. A Nigma physicist contributed to the gravitational mapping project that opened 3 new trade corridors. They are not a broken people. They were a proud people who were led in the wrong direction, and when that leadership was removed, they turned out to be capable of quite a lot. I am recording this because the archive requested it. Testimony from people who were there, for the historical record. I want the record to be complete. We warned them. That part matters to me more than anything else. Before a single ship moved, before a single order was given, we stood in their palace and told them exactly what was coming if they continued. We gave them every chance to choose differently. That is who we are. That is what we do. We warn them first. If you are listening to this and you are not human, I want you to understand one thing. We are not looking for conflict. We do not enjoy what happened. We carry the weight of it, all of us who were there, every single day. But we do not stop. We have never known how to stop. It is the one thing about us that has never changed. From the very first moment we looked up at the sky and decided to reach for it. So listen, when we tell you something, please. It is so much easier for everyone if you simply listen.